Good morning, guys. It's good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for joining. Happy post-Thanksgiving. I have a little issue with my green screen. I'm going to mess around with my settings for just a second here. Good morning, Armored Raven, Jeannie, Lindsay, Jason. It's good to see you guys. Chris, good to see you. Let's see here. There we go. That's a little better on my green screen. Not perfect. Green screens are a pain, let me just tell you. I'm gonna have to go with that, I think. You teeter on this edge of, making your face disappear and having the background out. It's kind of a fun little dance. Y'all start thinking about topics as we get going. Stacia, good to see you. Got a couple topics from last week, but happy to take anything you guys want to talk about. Parousia, welcome. Good to see you. I had an interesting Thanksgiving. It's funny as you get older and you start starting to have people over to your house, and host it yourself, and so many strange things happen that you can't control with family and and all that stuff. It's amazing to me how sensitive you have to be really to other people when that's the case. And I'll just say I did something this Thanksgiving the last couple days that it wasn't received very well. That's all I'll say. And it was partially due to me, but partially to the sensitivity of other people that I wasn't aware of. And it turned out not to be great. And so I had a couple apologies to make after Thanksgiving. But hopefully God will mend some of those issues. I hope you guys had a good time with family, friends, or whatever you did this past week. I hope it was good. Since it's past 9:30, I'll go ahead and show up on the screen the topics we had from last week that will carry over to this week unless we come up with some other topics. So let me pull that up for you. Here's the topics that I had from last week. We have the topic of Christmas in the early Christian writings from Lindsay, and I plan on addressing that. I did do some research on this, have some good information for you. Then C. Jones mentioned, where are the lost tribes of Israel? Are they in Europe? And honestly, this one is such a large topic that I think we're going to do a part 1 today and a part 2 in a future session because it's just so much to it. It took me a while just to get up to speed on exactly what happened in the Old Testament with the tribes and the split and then what happened to them after that. So we may get to part 1 of that today, but we will not completely answer that question today. So then I did have with Jason Sumner a discussion over email about 1 Peter 3:19. I thought that was interesting and might be interesting to the group. So if we have time, then I may go into the information that he and I went over on that just because it's interesting, I think. And so that's a possibility. Now, this one down here at the bottom from C. Jones last week, the history of the modern Jews and are they real? or are they Khazarian, or what? I think I'm not going to do that today. It's an interesting topic and legitimate topic. It's just big. And it also will probably get us banned. So that being said, it's definitely something every one of you should research on your own. As far as what happened to the Jewish nation after the first century, what was that? I mean, I have some notes and information on that, but man, there's a lot to go over there. And we're talking, of course, about centuries and centuries and centuries of material. So it's just a very difficult topic to wrap up into a tight package without me just doing days and days of research, which I've done on many topics before. But in the interest of the live stream, that may not be one we can address very holistically on a live stream. So, yeah. Good morning, Squiffy Bear and Shadestone. Welcome, brother, sister. Appreciate you. So again, this is last call. Really, last couple minutes, I'll let you guys get in some topics before we get started. So please, put anything you want to talk about in the chat there, and we will add it to the list, or may give it precedence since, you know, some of these things are fill-ins from last week. That's up to you guys. I'm actually really excited about this first one, Lindsay. I learned some things doing this study, so I think what I bring will be interesting, and also was very interesting for myself, so that'll be good. I'm excited about that one. Oh, I just realized my title wasn't up here. Welcome to the Sunday gathering. All right. Come Alive, you said they want me, are you talking about me, to debate Sean Griffin? I don't know Sean Griffin. I'll debate anyone. I actually am getting to the point where if someone does ask me to debate, I think I probably will do it now. I think I feel comfortable, confident in the things we talk about and the way I present the information. I think I can do that. If someone really did reach out to me, you know, other than Doug Hamp, who did it a while ago, maybe I would do it with him if he asked me again. I don't know. He just kind of let that drop, so I did too. Russell Davis, welcome this morning. You say, view on James and Peter versus Pauline Christianity. That's a good one. That may be one that also has to be researched. It's hard sometimes. Some of you guys bring some topics that are like deep, like lots of study needed. And so, yeah, thank you. I mean, Russell, I could at very least today talk about that. It would be, I think, a little shallow, but I do have views on it. If that's what you want me to do, I can do that for sure. So, Lindsay and Come Alive, I'm interested. You keep talking about this debate. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Lindsay, this is what last week in the chat you were talking about, that there was a debate going on that evening, if I'm not mistaken. So now I feel bad because I think I need to go back and watch that debate. I think I would like to see that. I'm going to put some notes down here just so I remember about this. Sean Griffin debate Matt, Grant, Jeriel, welcome, brother. It's good to see you. God bless you, brother. You know, guys, I don't know how many of you know this, but there's so many of you guys that and by the way, I appreciate this to no end, that you spend time with me and with us, with each other here, and then you go to a church and you also spend time with that church body. I'm just thankful that this is that important to you too, that, you know, what we're doing here, what we talk about is so important. I mean, it's humbling. It's humbling, honestly. It's just humbling that we together doing this is that important for all of us. So thank you. Thank you. I don't know how to say that other than thank you. Okay, sure, Russell. Yeah, we will touch on that then at the when we get down here. I think I may put that one just above Jason Sumner's that we talked about, just because Jason and I talked about this already, but it's an interesting thing. It's kind of a side note I think everyone will like. But okay, I think we're about good. We are about good. So let's see here. I got to do one thing for... Oh, by the way, I need to make this comment. Before we get started, guys. I need you to understand something, and that is, today, just before this, I was going through the chat in our previous live stream last Sunday, and I want you to know what I saw, and that is that a lot of a lot of comments were shadow banned by YouTube. And it's very frustrating for me, but it's very frustrating. If you mention, by the way, Jews, and if you mention Zion or Zionism or Khazaria, I mean, that comment literally got deleted, just gone. I can't find it anymore. Just know that when you mention those things, it's gonna, at bare minimum, auto-moderate them, so I will not be able, you know, especially while I'm talking, live streaming, it's hard for me to get to that and get it at immediately, so I can push it to the surface and it'll show up. So just be aware of that. Imri, thank you for joining. Good morning, brother. Thank you for coming. But I just wanted to mention that, guys, because I think there were at least 5 or 6 comments that people made that got just immediately moderation. So you know, someone has to click a button, and so in, you know, the effort to keep that okay, Squiffy Bear, I just made you a moderator for the day. So if you can just watch the comments, and if you see something that goes to moderation and is obviously not, you know, offensive in any way, please allow that to be seen, if you don't mind. Thank you. That will help tremendously, I think. But just be aware of that, guys. If you want to make a comment, you can do it by just putting the first letter of a word. I think it'll still be apparent what you mean in the case of like Jews or something like that, you know. I think that you can probably get your point across. Just use some, you know, intelligence about what might or might not be censored by YouTube, because they are Satanists. So thank you for being aware there and helping us out so that your comments do get seen. I want that. I want this communication, this conversation you guys are having to be able to continue. I don't want it to be stifled like that. All right. So let's get on to our first topic, and that will be, first I will turn my music a little down here so we don't have that to contend with. And we will get on to the topic, and I'm going to call it The Origin of Christmas. And this was Lindsay Ball's request from last week. She mentioned, is it in the early Christian writings? And I took it as, well, definitely I'll check that, but I wanted to know, because I honestly didn't. I didn't know, where did the celebration of Christmas, specifically on December 25th, where did that come from? Where did it come from? No, okay. And then let's all back up a second and recognize all the different narratives we've heard, not only from not only from the secular world, but from Christians who say Christmas is pagan. Don't celebrate that thing. It's terrible. You're putting up a druid tree and dancing around it like witches in the Scottish forests or whatever it is. It's so we have heard that narrative, and that's a very, by the way, modern narrative. It's a very modern narrative. People didn't say that stuff as much, a century ago. But this century, man, it's come out. Christmas is pagan. Don't celebrate Christmas, right? All right, so what I'm going to do here is take you into my notes as I pulled stuff, because there was a lot of information, but I wanted you to be able to see this. So, origin of Christmas. So I hope that this is going to be visible to everyone. I'll try to make everything big enough so it's viewable. You can see it good. Okay, I think that's getting there. So you can see I just pasted in links as I was going through stuff, but to just pop through these notes, how was the specific date of December 25th selected? And so when you just go out there searching, you'll see that most websites, blog posts will just say, oh, it's never been confirmed how that date was selected. It's never been confirmed. Casting doubt on the date, okay? Just without any knowledge, they just say, oh, it's not been confirmed. They'll say it's likely come from negotiations between Eastern Christian churches of modern-day Egypt, Syria, Turkey, and Greece, who primarily celebrated what? Epiphany, and the Western Christian Church, which included Northern Africa and Southern Europe. So they immediately lump in Christmas with the Epiphany, right? Or the solstice, or all these different pagan, religious events around the same time. And of course, they do have an agenda in doing this, but we'll see as we go forward that it may not be that close to the truth in some regard. They'll say things like this: December 25th likely comes from the date that Constantine came to power, ending the persecution of the Christians. And I'll say this, I looked after I saw that, I was like, oh, well, how can I find out when Constantine came to power? And I looked all over for when did Constantine come to power, what date, and I never found anything related to that it had anything to do with December 25th or that time period. So it's just interesting that, and by the way, I will be the first to admit that I spent time on this, but I didn't spend, again, it's almost, you can study something for 5 minutes or for 5 hours or for 5 days or for 5 months, right? And you'll get more information. I will admit my study of this was in the hours range. So I spent a little time on it. But likely there are possibly some blind spots, I'll admit. But I'll just say, when I started digging in some of these things, was the date Constantine came to power near December 25th? I couldn't find anything that supported that, okay? You would think that also would be kind of easy to find. I mean, but anyway. So some people say that Dionysius Exiguus, a 6th century monk, was the first to date all of history from December 25th, the year of our Lord 1. So apparently, according to, scholarship, history, whatever, historians, Dionysius Exiguus in the 6th century, so the 500s, was the first one to say, we're going to do our calendar from the date that Christ was born, December 25th, in 1. Essentially the first year. We're going to make that the first year. So he was the first one to do that. Okay. But that doesn't mean that's the first we hear of December 25th throughout history. Okay. So anyway, but at least he was the first one that started, I think, according to what I read, started pushing the idea of changing the calendars to all say, well, we're going to start back at 0 or 1 from when Christ was born, okay? Other traditions give dates as late or early as mid-November or late as March, and that's a very broad statement that doesn't help us very much. So, I just put down here things as I saw them going through. Historian William J. Teague offers a view that consensus arose in the church to celebrate Christ's conception on March 25th. His conception on March 25th, and it was reasonable to celebrate his birth 9 months later. So that's an idea that came from this William J. Teague guy. And again, once I read some other things, this didn't make any sense to me. So I'll just leave that on the table and move forward here. Cultures around the Mediterranean and across Europe observed feasts on or around December 25th, marking the winter solstice. Now, this is true, guys. This is definitely true. There were pagan cultures, religions around the Mediterranean area, and they did have feasts and things going on near the winter solstice around December 25th. And I think that the winter solstice actually, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't it change every year? It's not exactly on the same day every year, but that winter solstice is important to Druids and pagans and all sorts of, of that kind of thing. So, yes, this is true. Does this mean that Christmas is a Druid practice or a pagan practice? Not necessarily. So let's keep moving forward. So things that do happen around the time of December 25th, right, is Jews, that they have Hanukkah, right? The Festival of Lights. And that's because of things that happened before Christ. In the books of Maccabees, it's recorded all these different, events that, and some miraculous, that seem to have occurred when they took back the temple in the city from Antiochus Epiphanes, when all that came about and happened. And so Hanukkah is celebrated to memorialize those events. And again, I just gave a really bad description of where Hanukkah came from, but if you want to know the events, I'm sure there's lots of information you can get on Hanukkah. Now, the Germans had a Yule festival, and that's where the Yule log came from, and that, of course, did happen during the late winter, like around the time of December 25th. Scandinavians as well, the same type of thing. They feasted on meat, they drank wine and ales, they burned fires and candles, and made ritual sacrifices of animals to their ancestors. Okay, so all this does occur around the time frame, and this is ancient stuff. They did this from way back. The Celts, they also would celebrate the solstice. The Celtic legends connected the solstice with Balder, the Scandinavian sun god, who was struck down by a mistletoe arrow. And so that's where we get mistletoe and all that stuff. And then the Romans, with their Saturnalia, holiday or festival, they would feast and give gifts to the poor. Okay, so now you start to see where some of the things that we do during Christmas, some of them came from some of these practices, right? I will admit that. There's nothing hidden or secret about that. Yes, the giving of gifts probably came from some of these different festivals where people that came out of these cultures, they did these things. So of course they would, as some of them, maybe became Christian and started to understand Christ and who God was, would start bringing some of those same, they're like, well, we are giving gifts now because that's what we always do, but it's for God, it's for Jesus, it's to celebrate Jesus. It's no longer about those things. So anyway, just a thought to plant there in your head. Saturnalia, again, characterized just like the Scandinavians and the Germans with drinking ale, gambling games, the eternal burning of candles, fires, feasts, dissolution of the class structure. That's an interesting thing. They said during Saturnalia there was no slave and no master, no rich or poor. They would all celebrate in the streets together, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how that translates at all to Christmas, but I just thought that was interesting, a little tidbit. But again, the mistletoe comes from these pagan customs, for sure. Christmas stories, replaced some of these heathen practices and tales, but the practices seem to hang, right, with Christmas. Candles were continued to be lit for Christmas. Kissing under the mistletoe remained. Saint Nicholas, who was a real person, right? Saint Nick was real. Despite what, some people think, he was a real person, and he gave gifts. And so as a saint, he was obviously of the Christian persuasion, right? He was a real legendary figure of the 4th century, Lycia, a province of Asia, a charitable man who would throw gifts into homes as he went by, probably on his sleigh. I mean, that's what they rode back then. So this was, you can see how all these different little practices just got amalgamated into Christmas as time went on. Christmas carols around the 13th century, apparently. Christians added Christmas caroling to the Christmas celebration. They would go to house. Then Christmas trees, this came from Germany alone. That's why you have O Tannenbaum, the song. That's a German word. It's a German song. Christmas trees came from this Yule celebration in Germany, right? The 8th century English missionary St. Boniface, apostle to Germany, is supposed to have held up the evergreen tree as a symbol of the everlasting Christ. So how is that pagan? I mean, yes, they had a pagan celebration that it came from, but then Boniface comes along, he converts most of the nation of Germany to Christianity, and they instead start to view the evergreen tree as a symbol of Christ, whose kingdom lasts forever, right? So is that pagan? I mean, does it sound bad, or does it sound like Christ is taking over the holidays? I mean, you tell me. By the end of the 16th century, Christmas trees were common in Germany. Some say that Martin Luther himself cut the first one and took it home and decked it with candles to represent the stars. And when the German court came to England, the Christmas tree came with them. Now, this is interesting. Puritans forbade Christmas. Now, Puritans were one of the groups that did not like Christmas because they said it had its roots in paganism. And I need to study, honestly, I need to study Puritans a little more. I've heard stuff like this about the Puritans and the Quakers too. They had very conservative views, very staunch. Anything that reeked of anything other than, anything pagan, they would just forbid it. In fact, they would put people in jail or fine them in New England, in America, if they were caught observing Christmas, okay? So it's just a really interesting thing that the Puritans, they took this staunch stand against Christmas, okay? So we won't go into all that detail there, but just know that the Puritans stood against Christmas. And then Charles Dickens, honestly, when Charles Dickens started writing, and he wrote The Christmas Carol, he wrote a bunch of other stories, he always portrayed Christmas with this kind of, I will say, the vision he had of Christmas celebration was what became kind of the American way of doing Christmas, right? And so A Christmas Carol, while totally fictional, he's actually projected some of the ideas that became what we know as Christmas. So it's interesting, again, how these ideas all just became mishmashed and amalgamated. He's the first one to ever do, eating turkey on Christmas for Christmas dinner. That wasn't really a thing before Charles Dickens wrote Christmas Carol. So then, and this is about the last thing we'll do as far as modern, how Christmas is celebrated. But the Christmas tree is admired even by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert and their children in December of 1848. And there's let me see, I think I have a picture of this I'd like to show. Let's see. Sorry. Because this picture went throughout newspapers and stuff like that, and it, again, solidified the idea of Christmas in the minds of people, especially in America, right? But here's that picture. This was supposedly the royal family enjoying Christmas at their Christmas tree, and so this kind of helped solidify the idea of doing that in the minds of Americans. Very interesting. So anyway, let's see. That's really how all the practices seem to have gotten wrapped up into Christmas, into the December 25th celebration. But now here's where I started digging into the date itself. Where's the first time I could find that date was mentioned, December 25th? And so here's where I started going. There's this thing called the Roman Philocalian calendar. And the chronographer who took this calendar down in the year 354 indicated that the Christmas festivals were observed by the church in Rome by the year 336 AD, and that it was done on December 25th. And so this is one of the earlier accounts that even, okay, so 336, 300 years after Christ died and resurrected, December 25th was celebrated as Christmas. So that date is really very old. It's not just based on the solstice, okay? They were doing this then. So I kept digging, of course. They say this is the oldest extant notice of a feast of Christ's nativity at December 25th in this Roman almanac, this Philocalian calendar from Rome. So that's the only or earliest mention of the feasts being celebrated on December 25th, okay? So you got to be very specific about these things. We're going to find an earlier reference to the date, though, okay, earlier than this, 300 years after Christ. So going further, this is what I found that opened my eyes and was like, wow, Hippolytus of Rome. So Hippolytus was born in the 2nd century and lived through into the 3rd a little bit. So really less than about 100 years after Christ, okay? About a generation after Christ. Like the people in his generation knew grandparents that knew the apostles. That's where we're talking about here. And Hippolytus of Rome names December 25th as the birthday of Jesus Christ in his commentary on Daniel, which was probably written around 202 to 211 AD, very soon after Christ. So you'd think, if anybody knew, this guy knew. This was about as close as you could get to the literal time frame. So for him to be wrong, just think about that. For him to be wrong would mean that they couldn't remember in one generation when Jesus Christ was born. That doesn't seem to be possible, right? That seems to be a little far-fetched. So here's what he says. This is the passage that he wrote in 200 AD. For the first advent of our Lord in the flesh, when he was born in Bethlehem, was December 25th. A Wednesday, while Augustus was in the 42nd year, but from Adam 5,500 years. He suffered in the 33rd year, March 25th, Friday, the 18th year of Tiberius Caesar, while Rufus and Rebellion were consuls. In his commentary on Daniel, chapter 4, section 23, verse 3. And that's pretty specific, isn't it? Just think about that. For someone to be that specific, that close to Christ's birth and death. When I saw this, I honestly sort of stopped looking, because this is too early to think that they just didn't know at this time. Okay, this is not 2,000 years later. It's not 100. Well, it is 100 years later, but it's not 300 years later. It's not. So this is about as good as we could get, guys. That December 25th. Now, I will say that this translation in English is a little funky because it really doesn't name the 25th of December, but the way it says it is a different way, like the way they would mention the calendar. So he mentions something about January, but 8 days prior, so it falls on December 25th anyway. So Lindsay, you're saying they had a superstition that you died on today that you were conceived, on the day you were conceived. And you say, so 25th March plus 9 months. Well, maybe, but he's saying that, oh yeah, that's right. So he was conceived essentially in March. That's right. By the Holy Spirit inside the Virgin Mary and born December 25th. Yeah. Come Alive, you say he must have overlooked Luke chapter 1. It all starts with the course of Abia, September. Christ was conceived 3 months post. 9 months later comes back to September. Well, that's a good question. So I did talk to a pastor friend of mine about this and mentioned it. And one of the comments was, well, you should be able to also follow the feasts and what was going on at the time and get back to the day and all this stuff. And I said, yeah, that's probably what the next step would be in this research. The next step would be to try to pinpoint based on feasts and the events mentioned in the Gospels, like you're saying, Come Alive. And so, yes, possibly could do that. But that's, again, another thing that would take quite a few more hours of research to get to. And the problem is, too, so here's another problem with some of that to me. I have looked at things like, star charts and the way stars align in different days back in the time of Christ, right? I have looked at that. Many people have. The problem is, do you trust your history? Do you trust your history? So how do we know that what year we're looking at is the year? So we're at a point in our modern history where we have a hard time pinpointing things like that going back. Do we trust that when we type into what's the application that I use? Stellarium, I think, is the application where I was, it calculates star paths backwards in time. I went back to the time of Christ and I looked at stars and stuff like that. How do you know, based on that we're talking about the same years? Because most of us feel like our history has been clouded at best, if not totally manipulated, to where we are hundreds or thousands of years off of our actual timeline. I mean, as far as our dates, right? So we'll Come Alive. Let's look at that in Luke. Okay, you say Luke chapter 1. I'll pull it up. I mean, there's no reason we can't. Let's do it. Because I'll admit, I don't remember that. I didn't remember seeing that. So, Bible Hub, Luke 1. Let's see here. I'm sure this is pretty visible for you guys. Abia, there we go. Yep, so here's where it says, verse 5, in the days of Herod, king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, in the course of Abia, and his wife was the daughters of Aaron. His name was Elizabeth. They were righteous before God, walking in the commandments. They had no child. Abia. And Zechariah was the father of John the Baptist, right? Come Alive? And so all this about Zechariah, he was troubled. Lindsay Ball, everything's a lie. It feels that way sometimes. But okay, but let's, before we go further, everything's a lie, I get you. But that mention by Hippolytus at least tells us that they were celebrating the birth of Christ at the end of December in the 2nd century. I mean, he was, of course, writing the beginning of the 3rd century, but of course, during his lifetime, he probably was speaking of something he knew of. So during the 2nd century, the next century from when Christ existed. So yeah, you can ask yourself, were they adopting a Roman pagan ritual of perhaps Saturnalia for that? Or the Christians literally celebrating on the day of Christ's birth? So anyway, so Come Alive, you say Christ is 3 months younger than John. Okay. Oops. So anyway, back to Zechariah here in Luke 1. After those days, his wife conceived. So if his wife conceived around Abia, and that's in the fall, and you just told me that Christ was 3 months younger than he was conceived, 3 months after that, right? September, October, November, December. So that would be a conception in December and a birth in summer, right? So that's, I don't know. That's tough. I'll have to look up more about Abia and see how I feel about that. I don't know. But obviously it's there in the book of Luke. It says that. So, and the birth of Jesus foretold. In the 6th month, angel Gabriel sent from God in the city of Galilee, a virgin spouse the name, blah, blah, blah. Angel said to Mary, fear not. Mary said, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be unto me according to thy word. So when does the conception of Christ occur? The conception wasn't mentioned here yet in Luke 139. So then down here, Mary's song of praise, the birth of John the Baptist. Elizabeth's full time came, she should be delivered and brought forth her son. Her neighbors and cousins heard and showed the Lord. It came to pass, they circumcised him, and mother said, and Zechariah's song. So Luke chapter 2. Yeah, John leaps in his mother's womb. That's right. That just happened. I saw that. That was in chapter 1. But the conception of Mary and Christ hadn't been talked about yet. So I don't know. I think well, Mary is great with child in Luke chapter 2, the beginning. So let's see. Did I just miss it? Birth of John the Baptist. Birth of Jesus foretold. The virgin angel came into her and said, hail, thou art favored. When she saw him, she was troubled. Mary, thou found favor with God. Thou shalt conceive. Okay, so that hadn't happened at the time the angel came. And the angel said, the Holy Ghost will come upon you. The power of the highest will overshadow you. So it's still, again, this is the angel speaking, has not happened yet. Mary visits Elizabeth in the hill country. And it came to pass when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe, meaning John, leaped in her womb. Was that at the coming close of Mary, or did it have to do with the fact that Christ was already conceived inside her? Because it sounds like it's talking about John leaped in Mary's womb, and that there's no mention of Jesus being, the conception having already occurred here. But again, maybe it was just left out. The conception's not spoken of other than the angel saying it's going to happen, and then the Bible moves on. I just don't see Mary abode with her 3 months and returned to her own house. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an assumption there, come alive, that the conception of the Holy Spirit occurred here after that 3 months, right? So is it exactly 3 months or not? I don't know. So that's tough. And then it mentions Elizabeth's full time came and she brought forth John the Baptist. So I don't know. It's tough. You can say 3 months because of this verse 56, but I don't know that that's really being specific about when that conception occurred of Christ. So I don't know. I mean, I'm on board with you. This is an interesting study I'd like to do more of and find out more. And perhaps I might put that on my notes. Study further the conception of Christ. With John the Baptist, 3 months, etc. Abia, I think that's something I need to look up and get more info on. So, historian Thomas Talley, Lindsay Ball, he says Sol Invictus was put on the 25th to compete with Christianity. Now that's an interesting concept. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. So, perhaps, again, and especially once, just know that the Roman Catholic Church at this time was non-existent, okay? There was no Roman Catholic Church. That didn't happen until late 300s, or in the 300s, when Constantine came along, right? So, and of course, their power only gaining steam towards the end of the 4th century. So there was no Roman Catholic Church. And so it was only about if these pagan religions had intervened and co-opted this thing for Christians, right? Or if Christians had co-opted their thing. And I'll be honest, guys, the way I feel about it is that literally what I see through history and what I experience is that Christ and the celebration of Christmas in December overshadowed all those pagan religions. What do you think Christ came to do? I mean, I'm not dancing around the Christmas tree praying to the witches and the woodland spirits so that they will come and give us blessings in the new year after the winter solstice, right? So I know that that's hard to, and for some people it seems like this really affects them more, to know that there's any relationship between what we practice and what some other religion practices. It's very hard, and I get that. But to me, the idea of God and Christ throughout history is one of reconciliation, one of redemption, one of essentially overcoming darkness with light, if you will. And so if we, I don't know, I'm just saying, for me, the way it falls in my heart is that if I put God and Christ first, then heck, if the pagans think that December 25th is their holiday, I'm going to take it over. And it's going to be one of light and truth in God. So I see a precedent for that too. I see a precedent for that. So all I'm saying is that's one way you could think about it, a perspective. Some people are hardcore, like if it has anything to do, like if they co-opted a pagan tree and they put it in their house, then I'm never going to have a tree. Never. That's, if that's the decision you think is right for you, then do it by all means. But does that mean I'm a pagan druid because I have a tree? No, I'm not. Never will be. So I don't know. It's not easy. It's a decision every person should make. Yes, Come Alive, you got me thinking. I think that's a great topic. I just wish I could really stamp that out, and it's hard to do in a short time period here. But you see where I got to with my study, and kind of that's the end of what I was able to do. And now I have this new, I can go into this stuff maybe this week or sometime and think more about it. If I come up with some more information, then I'll bring it to you guys. So I don't know how that sits with all of you. It may not sit well with some of you, and that's okay. I get it. I get it. Perusia, you mentioned this. I'll go back to your comment there. I guess my beginning thoughts on this were around that is it worth celebrating something that could be pagan in origin and reverence to a different Christ figure? Which Christ figure? Which different Christ figure? I guess I don't understand that part. But I understand what you're saying, though. Is it worth the risk, essentially? Is it risky to involve any practices that could be considered pagan in the celebration of God and Christ? I can't answer that 100% for you. I think every person really has to answer that for themselves. Trinity 88, I see your comment. You wonder if trees have something to do with electroculture, free energy, God's energy? It's interesting thoughts. I think we will move to our next topic then, guys. That's what I have today for the Christmas topic. I think that's a good, at least, start. And again, to me, some of that information about how early it was that December 25th was mentioned as the time to celebrate the birth of Christ. I think that's at least should give us pause to think about it. So, all right. Are y'all sure you don't have any other topics before we go into some of these topics? Because the Lost Tribes of Israel is a tough one. And I don't know that I've seen C. Jones on today. Maybe you've been on there. Let me make sure. I'm looking back. I don't see C. Jones. So anyway, he mentioned this. And I will admit, in searching out for the 12 tribes, it was a conundrum. There's so much. Stacia. Krampus, I don't want to do Krampus. I just looked up Krampus because I was curious. You saw my notes. Oh yeah, Krampus. Krampus is scary. Now Krampus, I'll just throw it on there. Oh, C. Jones, you're here. Good brother. I'm glad. Krampus, a horned anthropomorphic figure in Central and Eastern Alpine folklore who during the Christmas season scares children who have misbehaved. Assisting Saint Nick or Santa Claus. So, yeah. Apparently, the parents might have used the tale of this Krampus critter to scare the children into being good for the holidays. And by the way, I do not endorse nor support your watching of the movie Krampus. I think there's a movie, right? I've never seen it. I hope no one ever watches it. It sounds horrific. The pair visit children on the night of December 5th with Saint Nick rewarding the well-behaved with oranges, dried fruit, walnuts, chocolate, and the badly behaved children receive punishment from Krampus with birch rods. Oh my gosh. Guys, why'd you make me go there? Why'd you make me go there? I don't want to talk about Krampus. Bavarian Krampen, meaning dead, rotten, or from the term German Krampen, which means claw. So it's a demon that travels with Santa Claus to punish bad children. You guys are sick. You guys are sick. I don't want to talk about this anymore. No more. Okay, we're going on. I don't want to do that. The Lost Tribes of Israel. Lost Tribes of it. So the way C. Jones, you asked this was, where are the Lost Tribes? 11 or 12 of them? Are they in Europe? This is a huge topic, C. Jones. Like, oh my gosh. I had to re-educate myself on this because I honestly didn't know. I was thinking back, I'm like, well, where did the Lost Tribes go to? I think I know some things, but I wanted to re-educate myself. So this part one, I'm calling this part one. This is going to be knowing basically what biblically happened to the tribes and what the general consensus out there is. That's all I'm going to have time to do today because this is such a huge topic. So maybe if I get to a part two, which I want to do, it'll be more detailed, specific information about theories on if there is if the tribes are left, if they went to certain countries, if they're whatever. So there may be more to come, but I just wanted to mention that. Let me get a drink of water here. All right, I'm better. Okay, so I put down here this, and I'm gonna take stuff from my notes too, and I will put it on here for us to see. So where are the lost 11 or 12 tribes of Israel? Are they in Europe? And that's a very popular idea, right? So I guess there's some popular ideas. What are they? I didn't think through this, but I think there's some that the lost tribes went to Europe. The lost tribes and the Jews are black-skinned and went to Africa, right? That's another one. Or the lost tribes were simply dispersed and I'll say it this way, bred out in other countries, right? And that's what I kind of felt, really. That's what I've mostly kind of thought, leaned towards that one, where the lost tribes were dispersed and they kind of just bred out as they interspersed with the populations of these other countries. So let's see here. I want to make sure I see your comments too. And do they even exist, C. Jones? Yeah, because you mentioned, I think you were the one also that mentioned this topic, the history of modern Jews. Are they real, or are they Khazarian, or are they whatever, right? Yeah. And so I get you there. And at the end of this, I'll give you my idea, okay? I'll give you my this is what I think, but I haven't studied enough to know for sure and to tell you and give you evidence. But yeah. So where are the lost 11 or 12 tribes? Let me see here now. Get started in my notes and start pulling stuff over into that document. You can see once I get there. So just basically, you know this, but 12 sons of Israel, sons of Jacob, became 12 tribes of Israel. God freed them from slavery in Egypt, brought them to the land that he promised their forefathers. So centuries later, after King Solomon died, the Israelites divided the kingdom into two. The north became Israel with 10 tribes, the other 2 tribes in the south called Judah. And then, this is interesting, guys, because, what was it, last week we did Isaiah 7 and 8? Well, that's what it was talking about, this in 722 BC when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom. Do you remember that it was Ephraim and Rezin, that king, and I don't know, a couple other names, right? That was the northern kingdom of Israel, and they were defeated. God said in that prophecy, I'm going to bring Assyria in and wipe them off the map, right? And they will become not a nation any longer. And he said within 65 years that was going to happen. So according to that, back then, apparently God felt like he was going to take care of the northern tribes. That they weren't necessarily going to be, well, I guess the idea of them becoming not a people, which is what that prophecy said, doesn't necessarily mean they were obliterated, but that they would no longer be essentially Israel or Ephraim. But anyway, so the northern tribes, many of the 10 northern tribes immigrated to Judah. Some members of these tribes fled and were taken captive or deported to other lands. See 2 Kings 17 and 1 Chronicles 5. And these became known as the 10 lost tribes. All right. So that's kind of the basics of what happened to them. And I'll just keep throwing some of the stuff up here like this, because of persecution over the centuries in many of the countries where they now live. Now this is getting to modern time. Many hid their Jewish heritage by practicing their faith in secret. Some are locally known to be Jewish and suffer prejudice and persecution. So, okay, now we're getting into modern times, and this article where I pulled this was a article denouncing anti-Semitism, right? In fact, many of the articles that I tried to pull up, they would start with what are the lost tribes, and they would end with denouncing anti-Semitism and the horrible hatred against the Jews of all the people all through history, right? Okay, which is, I think, a lie. And then they mentioned this too in the same article. They mentioned this, which is true. In the last 75 years or so, which I think that's incorrect. It's not just in the last 75 years or so, but Jewish communities are known in Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, India, China, and other surprising countries. Even more surprising is that some members of the lost tribes living in these countries look like any other people native to these regions. Now that's, to me, interesting to say. It's almost like they're trying to lump in more people than is true into the Jewish nation for, I think that's what's being said now in the chat, right? Squiffy, it's becoming a liability shield, right? More people than actually should be considered Jews are being considered Jews in some of these places. Like, especially if they don't look any different than the native people, well, then how do you know they're different? Anyway, yeah. So back to my notes here. Let's see. Where did I go next? Right. So just to reiterate and think about this, the two of Jacob's sons, Judah and Benjamin, they were Judah, okay, the lower kingdom, and they're the ones that settled there, and they survived all throughout from like the time of that Assyrian captivity to the time of Christ. And of course, the genealogies of Christ come through the tribe of Judah, etc., etc. So they survived to the time of Jesus' birth and were the Jews, essentially the Jews of that day. That's who we're talking about, is the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. That was the Jews of Jesus' time. Okay, let's see. Going down further through my notes. I did a bunch of different articles that I studied on that same stuff just to confirm what was thought about this stuff. Let's see. This is an interesting little tidbit. Let's read through this together. I just found this in the Britannica Britannica Encyclopedia article on the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Generally Britannica has some pretty good explanations. They have some good information. So I just say that just in case you run across it, just know that it's pretty good. 10 lost tribes of Israel. 10 of the original Hebrew tribes under the leadership of Joshua took possession of Canaan, the promised land, after the death of Moses. It was all these sons of Israel, of Jacob. In 930 BC, they formed the independent kingdom of Israel in the north, two other tribes, Judah, Benjamin, in the south, and then the Assyrians in 721 destroyed the north. Nevertheless, here's the interesting stuff. A belief persisted that one day the 10 lost tribes would be found. I don't know why this belief persisted, but apparently it did. Eldad Hadani, for instance, a 9th century Jewish traveler, reported locating tribes beyond the rivers of Abyssinia, on the far side of an impassable river called the Sambashan, roaring torrent of stones that becomes subdued only on the Sabbath, when the Jews are not permitted to travel. Interesting. That was a 9th century traveler, said he found some Jews in this area. Then Manasseh ben Israel in 1604, 17th century, used the legend of the lost tribes in pleading successfully for admission of the Jews into England during Oliver Cromwell's regime. So this, is it that there were the lost tribes literally existing in these different countries, or was it that they were using the story to enter other countries? I don't know the answer 100%, but especially way off in the 16th, 17th century, that seems like a strange, argument to be made that, oh, England, you should let in the Jewish people into your nation because we're the lost tribes of Israel, right? That seems a little suspect to me. I don't know about you. People who at various times said to be descendants of the lost tribes, including the Assyrian Christians, the Mormons, the Afghans, the Beta Israel of Ethiopia, and the American Indians, and the Japanese. All those different peoples have at times claimed to be the lost tribes of Israel. Among numerous immigrants to the state of Israel since its establishment in 1948 are a few who likewise claim to be remnants of the 10 lost tribes. It is a powerful claim, right? If you can convince someone that you are of the lost tribes of Israel, what kind of respect, honor, benefit would that give you? And so, I think we have to ask ourselves if this is truly the 10 lost tribes moving throughout these different countries throughout history, or is this a tripe that's used to garner sympathy, right? The descendants of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin survived as Jews because they were allowed to return to their homeland after the Babylonian exile of 586 BC. So that's what we see in the book of Nehemiah. And by the way, we'll get to that. Yeah, here's what I found about Nehemiah as I went forward with this. Ezra and Nehemiah sharply disagree with modern historians on this, right? If you read Ezra and Nehemiah, they don't talk at all about the northern kingdom. It's like it does not exist, which, according to the prophecies in Isaiah 7 and 8, doesn't sound like it should exist at that time, right? In fact, the two prophets are the only reliable eyewitnesses existing today concerning the restoration period of biblical history, when they came back into the Holy Land and started rebuilding the city and the walls and the temple. Both agree on an important point. They specifically refer to the returnees as being only of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, corporately known as the house of Judah. So our biblical testimony sounds like it's claiming that the northern tribes just didn't exist anymore. They were made not a people. And even if there were remnants that did persist, meaning they didn't all die, that these guys didn't see them as Israelites. They didn't see them as Jews any longer. And perhaps neither did God. I mean, God literally brought the Assyrians to destroy them. So, we have to ask ourselves, what was God's intent there? We receive the definite impression that Ezra had no idea where the northern tribes were himself. In 2 Kings 17, we are told the house of Israel was exiled by Assyria to Hala, Habor, and the cities of Medes. If they were still in the same location in Ezra's day, surely he would have sent emissaries there to encourage them to return to the land of Canaan. Yet Ezra did not send an envoy, nor did he seem to know where they had gone. So, yeah, think about this too. Those tribes who were scattered or defeated in the invasion of Assyria, if they didn't want to come back to the Holy Land, also that makes me wonder, why would they also want to maintain their genetic and cultural integrity in those foreign nations? If you don't care anything about your country enough to go back when it's being restored, then would you care enough to not intermix and interbreed with the other nations that you were a part of? So to me, it's almost like, number one, it sounds like God did not have a plan for Israel, the northern kingdom, after that. Like, they were done as far as he was concerned. Then number two, it sounds to me like they didn't care anything for their heritage. They didn't love God. They didn't want to maintain the sanctity, the purity of their Jewish heritage. So as they're going into these other countries, I would think they would breed with the other nations and become, again, not a people. So those are just a couple of things I saw as I was going through this information. The prophet Nehemiah, who spoke only of the existence of the house of Judah in Nehemiah 4:16, and the two tribes that comprise Judah and Benjamin. Again and again, Ezra and Nehemiah only talking about Judah and Benjamin, never talking about the other tribes, as if they were no longer in existence. So let's keep seeing what else did I find here. So now we get into some of the interesting stuff about some of the connections. Let me see if I can do this in an order that makes sense. Here's some information on Josephus that Josephus gives about the Jews. So Josephus affirmed that while contingents of Jews lived in Palestine, the 10 tribes of Israel stayed in Asia. So this is what Josephus said, that those lost 10 tribes were perhaps in existence, but they stayed where they were. They didn't care to come back to Jerusalem. Again, I think there was this sense in which they were wicked and they didn't care anything about their Jewish heritage, except possibly as a tool of, manipulation. And, that makes me think too, guys, like, what significance would there be to finding the lost tribes? I don't even know how that's significant anymore. What significance does that play to us? Zero? I think zero. What significance does it play to God? I think it plays zero, because they would have to come to Christ just as we have to. There's no difference now between Greek or Jew, as Paul said. There's no difference. It's always by faith. It's always been by faith. And apparently those tribes didn't have it in the beginning when they were destroyed by the Assyrians because of God. So what's the significance of the lost tribes any longer? I don't really know. Anyway, let's keep going. Josephus asserts that the 10 tribes of Israel were still in Asia at the first century. His comment that the 10 tribes were an immense multitude indicates we should expect to find large masses of Israelites in Asia in the first century, not isolated in the remnants. So that's interesting. So Josephus apparently said there were a lot of Jews in Asia, but I did not do the homework of finding where he talks about this. Okay, so I would think that it's in the Antiquities of the Jews, but it could possibly also be in the Wars of the Jews. I'm not sure on that. Inevitable result of nations having large populations in the ancient world was the achievement of political and military power. His comment, Josephus comments that the Israelites were beyond the Euphrates, so that's in the area of Asia, right? And C. Jones, your comment there is perfectly acceptable. Is perfect. I mean, I just wanted to bring that forward. And I said that last week. It's the heart of the futurist belief system because, why? I think it's because they think that that's the gathering. That when the prophets in the Old Testament talk about gathering the tribes together, which is what Christ said. Christ said, I'm here to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not have it. As Christ went through Palestine to the synagogues, Christ went to the Jews for their last chance to accept. And they rejected for the most part. And now the Revelation says that the remnant, the 144,000, was of every tribe. So that's interesting. It just, to me, makes me feel like they were accounted for, but from a national sense, God didn't see them as part of the nation anymore. Just about. The significance was gone. They had been wicked and been utterly defeated. But yeah, C. Jones, the futurist belief system is all about Israel. And I think the comment earlier about it being Zionistic is very pertinent. What is the goal of that? It's all to get the Jews back in their homeland, to let them establish a temple, a new temple, and start practicing all the old covenant stuff again, right? And Christians in that mindset want it. They want that, right? I used to want that. I used to think I wanted that when I was futurist in belief, my belief system. I used to think how, ooh, that's so awesome that the Jews will get their homeland again, and it's beautiful, and oh, they're just lonely for their home and to be be back as the chosen people of God again. I mean, I thought that way too. It is crazy. And after what God did, right? After what he did, he brought those men at Pentecost. He brought Jews at Pentecost from all the nations, right? They all heard in their own languages they'd grown up with because they were, most of them, born in those nations. So they heard in their own language. The gospel then went out to all nations at that moment as it started to spread through the first century up until the time of 70 AD when he judged the Jews and took them out. So let me look at my notes and see if we've got other things. Yeah, we do have a couple other things that we'll get to, but I'll just say it's like, for me, this is the part where I'm telling you my gut feel about the Jews of today. I feel like at the time of the first century in 70 AD, God made a statement, and the statement was, the Jews have been wicked. I'm now fulfilling and consummating my plan for Israel. There's no more sacrifice. He destroyed the temple. There's no more ritual. There's no more of the feasts and all the things for the Jews. And there's no more Jews. Not only did he destroy the temple and everything in it so they cannot practice that stuff, he destroyed all of them inside of it. And then 3 years later at Masada, the Romans took out all the rest of them, all the zealots that ran up there. Now, does that mean every single Jew on earth was killed? I don't believe that. But what I do think is that the significance of the Jewish nation is historical now. That now they are under the same covenant, if you will, agreements with God that we are. We have to believe that Jesus is his son. If they don't believe that, I don't think they're going to be in his kingdom in the future, ever. They have to come to that. If they stay as Judaists, they will never get to be with God. He did all of those things for them. Just think of that. I mean, yes, we are partakers. We were grafted in because we were the dogs who got the scraps from the table, right? Just like the woman who touched his garment, who was a Gentile. But they had every opportunity. Every opportunity. It's amazing what he did to try to turn their hearts, and they would not accept it. So right now, Jews are in the same boat as us. They have to accept Christ. They have to repent and believe and move towards God the Father, understanding that he sent his son to sacrifice for sin, the ultimate sacrifice, so they will never have to sacrifice again. If they don't understand that, then they won't go. They won't be a part of his kingdom. I don't know how any other way to say that. I mean, it's sad. And all those things I used to feel about the Jews and those loving feelings, I do have that for the Jewish nation, just in the sense that they were chosen by God to do and be this standard, this flag on a pole to show the world who he was. And they just threw it away. They threw it away. But God still got the glory because he judged that. That's how God still can get the glory out of someone doing evil, is when judgment comes and discipline comes. Then others see that and they're like, oh, they obviously did the right thing. God is God, right? Why do you think that the first century and 70 AD has been hidden from us for so long and not talked about? Hush, 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 hush. We don't want to talk about that because the Jews are special. We don't want to talk about that. Were they really judged? Were they really wrong? Yes, but we're not going to talk about that. Secret. Imri, I saw you on there. I thank you for joining, and thank you if you subscribed today. I appreciate that. This is good. We do this every week, and we love it. I can't say anything more than that. It's great. We just talk about this stuff. You're right. The hidden hand. What can you say? Oh my goodness. There's so much we could say, right? So now I wanted to mention before we get off this topic, and we've gone a long time, so I want to be quick here, but there is a connection to Europe with the Israelites. Now, I don't know if I want to go into all this, but there is a connection. So another very possible line of descent from King David provides an interesting link with the Norse Gothic tribes and their leader Odin. We read in 1 Chronicles 3 that Davidic descendant of King Judah Jehoiakim had one son, Azir. Now the reason they connect this to the Norse is because they have a god, a myth in Norse history named Asir or Aesir, right? With the different vowel structures and stuff. The name of a chief royal tribe living at Asgard, okay? The early Mideast homeland of the Norse people. Columbia Encyclopedia under the heading Germanic Religion says, in early times there were two groups of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir. A war between these pantheons reflects a war between rival tribes, etc., etc. The gods, they say, dwelt at Asgard. And apparently exiled Israelites of the 12 tribes gathered around their Davidic leader Aesir before leaving the Mideast for Europe. A later leader of these assembled tribes was Odin, whose name is purely Semitic. So that's a connection with the Norse gods, the kind of Celtic tradition. The Norse ancestral line has been historically reconstructed to King David. or in King David to Odin in the ancestry chart, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's one. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but know it's there. You can research that on your own. The other one that kind of took me by surprise was this one right here. Scotch, Irish, Welsh DNA, quote, proves Israeli descent. The Tuatha De Danann, the people of the ancient peoples of the Scottish area, Scotland and Ireland. Historians documented for many years the early settlement of the British Isles by Phoenician traders and colonists. Scholars knew that the Phoenician language is virtually identical to Hebrew. That's true. I can show you that. But the letters are almost exactly the same as Hebrew. The Bible confirms the Hebrews and Phoenicians sailed together to the western lands in 1 Kings. Biblical tribes like Dan, Asher, and Zebulun dwelled on the Mediterranean seaboard. I won't go far into this, but just note that the way they connect again is language. They connect and they say, well, Dan, the Danites, the people of the tribe of Dan, were the Tuatha De Danann. Okay, the Tuatha is people of, and Danann, of course, they say it, when you first just search for this, they'll say it's Danu, the god of the Scottish people, the ancient god of the Scottish people. But what if, and again, we can't really verify it, but what if that's not Danu? What if it's the tribe of Dan? What is the people of Dan? And so that's the things that are talked about in the stuff that I looked at. I just thought it was very interesting. I had some classes in my college about the Tuatha De Danann, and I had a guy that was an expert on it, had written books. So I just remember him talking about that group of people and their practices. It was very pagan kind of religions, but it's interesting. There may be a connection. I don't know. I think those connections are possible, but also possibly not very strong. I don't know. I don't know. It's something that maybe there's some information out there that would convince me. But for now, it is what it is. It's interesting. All right. That's all I'm going to do on the tribes today. That's part one. If there's a part two, then there will be a part two where maybe we go further into, maybe part two, C. Jones, is going to be what you asked about, kind of your second question. If we can do it without getting banned, maybe we can go there, more into modern history and what's happened with the Jews through time. Yeah. So it's good information. It's good to know things. All right. So Russell Davis, I want to get to your topic here. Now I would say to put your ideas on this. If I'm missing the mark or as I'm talking, put some more information. My view on James and Peter, James/Peter's Christianity versus Pauline Christianity. I think I know what you mean by that. So let me just hide all this stuff for now. I'll just talk about this one because, again, I didn't have any research done on this, but I think I can talk about it somewhat smartly. When you say James and Peter Christianity, I think of James, faith without works is dead. And if you read the book of James, it's only 5 chapters. If you're interested in this, I recommend you read that book a few times in a row to get his ideas on it. It literally is talking about, like, if you are not acting for God, doing the things that prove that your convictions are true, then your convictions essentially aren't even there. They don't matter. Your faith doesn't matter if it doesn't lead you to action. And yes, Quiffy Bear, you mentioned... That's why I said use the first letter. Don't say the whole word. Just put J. Okay? Do something like that. Like, we can't... If you want the stuff to pop up so we can actually speak, they're going to try everything they can to keep that stuff from... Probably just delete this video. Anyway. But yeah, the James conception of faith and obedience is that they're intertwined, right? And there's no faith without obedience. And I will say this, based on not only James, but possibly the Peter writings and even some of Paul's stuff. And man, Revelation says the dead, when they're given up from the earth, will be judged by their works. So what does that mean to you? And I'm not trying to say in any sense that there's anything like a works-based salvation. You don't work to gain salvation. There's nothing you can do to earn the ability to be saved, right? Christ paved the way for that. But is what the rest of the New Testament talking about? Is it talking about that if you're not acting on, if your thought doesn't lead to action, your belief doesn't lead to action, is he saying that that's not belief? Like, if you believe but don't act, he may be saying that that doesn't count for you. It won't get you there. Why did was it Paul said he wanted to run the race worthy, that he might gain the prize? I remember reading about Polycarp, who said he wanted to strive in his life. In one of Polycarp's writings, he said, I want to strive that I may gain the crown and get to reign on the thrones with those saints who are on the thrones in heaven. So there's some notion all through not only the New Testament, but the early church fathers of a striving, a working, if you want to call it a working out of your salvation, but I really, in my teaching, and I make some people mad about this sometimes, I stress the doing of works because I think it's something we de-stress, we de-emphasize in churches these days, the works. Not that you, by doing any work, provide any power that could save you. But perhaps God's looking for the type of faith that produces works, and that's the type of faith that gets you to heaven. If it doesn't, then that's not really faith. So I think that the distinction sometimes, Russell Davis, I think sometimes the distinction between James and Peter versus Pauline Christianity is fabricated by Calvinistic mentality. I don't think there's really a lot of difference. Paul, when he's writing in Romans 3, there's none who does good, no, not one. And he's talking about, specifically there, he's talking about the law to them. He's telling them there's nobody that's fulfilled the law. You can say you're Jews, you can say you did the works of the law, but nobody fulfilled it. Christ fulfilled it. So in that sense, he's trying to tell the Jews something specific. He's not talking to everyone saying that you can't do anything good, and so don't even try. Just lean on the work of Christ, right? That's the message in the churches these days. You can't do anything good. You're a filthy rag. You're a corrupt, fallen, original sin, diseased human. You can't do anything good. You're worthless. Only through Christ do you have any worth whatsoever. Does God really feel that way about you? Do you think God feels that way about you? Or does he want you as his child who he loves to do good works, to work out your faith, to go to others and serve? Is that what he wants? Or does he want you to be a staunch Calvinist who's like looking down his nose at other people because you were chosen, quote unquote? And thinking that just based on Christ's work alone, that you're just going to get a ride to heaven. Because you're standing on this Lutheran mountaintop of no works, no works, no works. I'm just kind of tired of hearing that, because I think it causes Christianity in general to be complacent. You can rest on the salvation in Christ. Don't do anything. You can rest in it. Those kinds of words and thinking is antithetical to what the apostles did and preached. And then when you read early church fathers, they also preached, go do the works, go do everything, go work for it, run the race, tell everybody you know, be bold, all these different things. And so none of the examples were to rest in our salvation and not do anything about it. And it's a fine line. We're talking about splitting hairs here. We're talking about nuance. And so don't go to this extreme, well, Bible scribe said you got to do works. And the other extreme is, you just have to say a prayer and you're saved. You don't have to do anything the rest of your life, right? It's not either one of those things. It's not either one of those things. We have to think beyond the level of a second grader, right? It's not all one thing or the other. It's not all or nothing. There's some nuance of this whole thing in the middle where God, yes, provided a way for you to be saved. And he explains the type of faith that it requires is the faith that leads you to action. If there's no action, your faith is dead. So I can't explain it any better than that, but I think that's how I fall on it. I emphasize works heavily because without works, our faith is nothing. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. And in fact, I don't think it means anything to God if it never spurs you to works. And that's just the way I feel about it. I'm kind of a hardcore angry person. So I come across as a very calm person sometimes, but inside I feel fire. I feel passion for this kind of thing. And I just want people to know that we are supposed to do things. If we're not doing things, then our faith it's not doing us any good. And I don't know if it's obviously not doing us any good in the physical, but in the spiritual, it may not be doing us any good either. That faith has to be one that leads to a change in your head, a change in your whole mindset, everything. So if your mindset changes for real, your actions will change, right? And that's why he's explaining it that way about faith and work. So I feel like I'm kind of rambling there now, so I'll stop there. I think I've made the point. But thank you, Russell, for asking about that. I agree that it's an important conversation. Important. Emery, I will add you to my prayer list. Thank you. Thank you, Emery. Appreciate that. Blessing to have you today. All right. I only have one more thing on the list, and I think I can get to it within 5 minutes. Let's see if we can do it. Let me see if I can do it. This is what Jason Sumner and I talked about this week. It was an interesting little study. And it is 1 Peter 3:19. So if you're wanting to turn there or follow along, I will bring it up on the screen. But in 1 Peter 3:19, so Jason asked me this week, he was like, the Moffat translation, there's some articles I've been reading. And the Moffat translation, a couple others mention Enoch in 1 Peter 3:19, where we will go to in just 1 second here. Let's open this up. Here we go. There we are. We go to 1 Peter 3:19. So there's 1 Peter 3 down here in verse 19. This is the verse. I'll start in 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh and quickened by the Spirit, by which he also went and preached unto the spirits in prison. So what I have always, shouldn't say always, but I mainly teach about this is that this is Christ after he dies on the cross, going to Hades and speaking to those that were imprisoned there since the time of Adam, knowing that according to the Bible and other ancient writings that all the people up into the time of Christ that died went to Hades. Now Enoch talks about that there were different partitions of Hades, some for the righteous and some for the wicked. and etc. So it's not like they were just these dead, meaning like the patriarchs and all the righteous who died before Christ. They went to this place in Hades that was not like a torture thing. They weren't being tortured or anything like that. It's just kind of a holding place. And the book of Enoch, first book of Enoch, talks about that place. But some places call it Abraham's bosom, right? But this is, as I understood it, this verse talking about when Christ died on the cross, went down there, and during that 3-day period, went down there and spoke to the spirits, meaning the spirits of the dead humans that were in the righteous area of Hades. And so that was that. Then, Jason Sumner was reading some articles that question this. They question, actually, there's a couple theories that I saw in the articles we were reading together. And one of them is that because, I think, is it up here in... Yeah, because in verse 20, just after what we read, Noah is mentioned and the ark. There are some people online that say, well, this was Noah it was talking about. It's not really talking about Christ. And then there's others that, Stacia, I don't think it's similar, that place in Hades. I don't think it's similar to Catholic purgatory. I think that's different. But it's a good comment. It's a good question that I wish I knew more about. So maybe I'll take a look at purgatory and see if I can come up with any idea if that came from some of those ideas from the book of Enoch. I don't know that for sure. Anyway, okay, so the two things we saw was some people saying this was Noah talking to the spirits in prison, and some people saying, no, this was actually Enoch talking to the spirits in prison. In fact, as I put on the title here, the Moffat translation, and there's a couple others I think that also do this, they add the name of Enoch into verse 19. They say, by which also Enoch went and preached to the saints in prison. And then by doing that, they are asserting that this is about Enoch talking to the imprisoned angels who fell and corrupted mankind in Genesis 6. So while I did read those articles and I found that interesting, what I wanted to do right off the bat was go to the earliest manuscript I could find, because I've done this before, and I wanted to look at the Greek in that manuscript behind 1 Peter 3:19 and see if those names, any of those names were there. Okay, so that's what I did, and I want to show you guys this because you too, by the way, can do this. I'm not special in any sense. I mean, I do know a lot about Greek now, and I know a lot about Hebrew just because of my study. I'm not fluent. I sometimes can recognize words. I know lots of, biblical words in Greek and in Hebrew, but you could do this just as easily as I can. It's just about knowing where to look. So I went back and I found the earliest. Let me see. I got to get to it real quick. So give me 1 second. I think it's Papyrus 72 of the Bodmer Papyrus collection. And that's a collection the Vatican has in their collection. But let me see here. I'll get it open and then I'll bring it up on the screen for you. Okay, so this, and I'll have to share my screen. Boop. There we go. This is the page of the Bodmer Papyrus collection, Papyrus 72, that contains 1 Peter 3:19. And I'll zoom in so it's easier for you to see. There we go. Okay, woo, a little too far, haha. Okay, so as I went here, here's what I have to do, okay? Just to show you what I do, because it's not rocket science. What I do is I want to look up 1 Peter 3:19, and I want to compare modern Greek to the Greek there so I can identify all the words, right? Because I had told you, I can't read straight off ancient Greek. But what I can do is, match things, right? And you could do the same thing. This is not magic here. It's just me looking at things and evaluating. taking some time. So what I did was I go here. This is a really good version of the scriptures, the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And a polyglot Bible is taking a language, multiple languages, and showing them together. That's what the word polyglot means in the sense of a Bible translation. But this is the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, which I love. I have a hard copy of this version. I love it. It's so fun to look through the Greek. 1 Peter 3, and then I'll go down here to verse 19, 10, 12. Oh, okay. Verse 20, verse 18. Wait a minute. There it is. Verse 19 right here. So that's verse 19 highlighted for you. But so what I did was I went to this papyrus and I'm looking for these words and I'm matching the words. Now there's a few differences that I've gotten used to because I'm aware of how things work with some of these ancient texts. But as I scanned through here, I found the words and I started matching them all. You can see I just marked here where verse 17 started at the top, on the top line. And then I put a slash where 18 started. And I put a square. This is an interesting thing to note about these papyrus is some of them have abbreviations they use for the names of Christ and of God. And this is the name of Christ. It's an abbreviation. They always put that line over it to show that this is Jesus Christ they're talking about. It's Christos. It's an abbreviated form of the Greek word Christos, but they abbreviate it with just 3 letters and then put the line over it to show this is Christ we're talking about. It's kind of interesting. Oh, by the way, this papyrus is from, what's the year? This is why I did this. Oh shoot, a monkey. I gotta find out what year it's from because I think it's still 1st century. Oh no, it's not. It's not. They think this papyrus, they dated this papyrus to the 3rd century. Okay, so anyway, 200s. All right. But that's the earliest one we have with 1 Peter in it. Okay, so that's why I went here. Anyway. So back to here, you see where I marked out verse 19 down here? And so that starts it. And all these words, by the way, are matches with the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. So let me get that up. As you can see, that right there matches the first word there, in, or whatever. And then which also. Chi is a very recognizable word. It looks like an X, but that's the K, A-I, right there in that third word. You see I put dots between each word so I could keep track where I was. The only word I even had a question about was the word spirit. And I'm trying to get a tool up here so I can mark on it for you. Yeah. So this word here is the word spirit. If you see me marking there and circling that, that is not the full word spirit. And I spent time on this one because I was like, well, that's different than I expected. So here, spirits, when it says he preached to the spirits, this is a full rendering of this word. Pneumato, I think, is the word, like breath or wind. It's the word they always use for spirit, pneuma, right? And that's a conjugation of that word here in the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. But then back over here in the text itself, you see that that is abbreviated. And it is the first few letters of the word, but it's one of those things, I think they're just abbreviating the word instead of putting the whole thing there. And I will admit, over here you see in the shoulder over here on the side, there's a bunch of writing that is honestly a little too small for me to make sense of. So I had a hard time translating that stuff. But of all these words, by the way, that's the only one I even questioned, the spirit right there. All of these other words, by the way, in the entire 19th verse in this manuscript, they are perfectly congruent with our modern Greek in the Apostolic Bible polyglot. So, in the most literal sense of the Greek, in which also to the imprisoned spirits having gone, he proclaimed, meaning Christ went and proclaimed to the spirits. Christ being the most previous, as you put a square around it, Christ is the most previous, the closest subject in the writing. So that's why I marked that out too. So does that make sense? So I brought this to Jason and we were like, well, that's pretty good evidence. That's a very early manuscript, the earliest that we have. And the word Enoch and the word Noah are nowhere to be found in that verse. So at least that tells us that the Moffat translation is wrong and that the other translations that include the name of Enoch in this passage are wrong. It just doesn't exist even in the earliest of manuscripts. So it's a good exercise. I like doing this kind of thing. I'm kind of a geek, so that's good to me. I love to. That at least helped us to get some sense of what the ancient manuscripts have. Now, there still could be a debate on, if you want to kind of go with a Noahic, meaning because Noah's mentioned further on in this passage, that's something that could be debated, argued, but I think the overwhelming evidence is that this is just Christ preaching to the spirits in prison after he died and went to Hades himself. So anyway, I just want to share that with you because we thought I thought that was really cool information. I just love looking through these manuscripts and seeing that what's in these earliest manuscripts is almost exactly what we've got today to work from in the Greek. Now, that doesn't mean that all the English translations are perfect, but at least we know we have a basis to start from that's pretty solid. So that's where we went on that. And thank you, Jason, for bringing that to my attention. I'm sure there's more we could probably do on that, but there always is more. So that is really it on the topics I have today, guys. And based on the time, I think we've done a good job. So I think we'll leave it there for this week. I see a couple of you with prayer requests, so I wanted to say that I will definitely put both you, Trinity 88, and Emery on our prayer request list for this week. And we will be thinking about that and praying about what your requests are there. I'm going to put those down here. Emery and Trinity 88. And I'll go back through the chat too, make sure I didn't miss anything as far as those requests. If there's any detail you want to give or not, that's fine. If you don't, your privacy is up to you. I'll try never to expose your privacy. But thank you guys for this time of being with me, especially after a holiday week. It's not always easy, but I appreciate it. And I've had a great time this morning. Again, think about these prayer requests for people on our chat. Let's actually pray for one another this week. Don't just come and go every Sunday morning, but now you're in a community, so let's make it a community by praying for each other, especially Emery and Trinity 88's requests here. And I'll try to see what I can do about mentioning that, but we all need to remember that and pray for you guys. So thank you so much for your time and your effort in coming each week. I certainly appreciate that. God bless you and your families. Stay safe and stay well.